Hello, Jan. Thank you for coming
Hi,
back. Welcome.
everyone.
Thank you so much for returning. For those that don't know, Jan and I have already discussed the question of are we living in a simulation? And we're moving on to something a little bit different today, which is what is happiness? So, Jan, I would love for you to start off and talk a little bit about what your definition of happiness is, if that's okay.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. Well, as you can see, my background is also a happy face. So I feel like happiness is a strong feeling, emotion of joy, contentment, satisfaction of your life. And on top of it, I feel like it's not just the pure pleasure you can get, but also you can feel like this kind of fulfilling emotions of you are making something valuable to the world, to the people around you. So I feel like, yeah, it's not just like superficial layer of pleasure, but also how you can make a meaning out of it. And what maybe we can also dive deeper into the question how we can get happiness later. But I feel like one thing very important to get happiness is kind of to align your expectation and the reality. So if you feel like your expectation meets the reality, and then you would feel, oh, that's great. I feel very fulfilled, and yeah, that make me feel happy. What about you, Rosanna?
I really like that. Yeah, just on that last point, I think that's something that's quite aligned with Buddhist philosophy, actually, this idea of expectations versus reality, because
Mm-hmm.
the whole Buddhist philosophy is attachment leads to suffering. So if you get overly attached to not necessarily, people, although that can cause issues as well, but attached to an outcome, you get in your head, I must do this in order to be happy,
Mm-hmm.
or I'll be happy when this happens. I think that's a really fallacious way of thinking, and I think
Yeah.
it causes a lot of trouble for people. So I think one of the ways,
Mm.
and I'd love to return to that topic you brought up about how we can actually cultivate happiness in our own lives,
Yeah.
but one of the ways is to manage your expectations, and not that we should encourage people to not aim for, extraordinary things. I think that's a
Yeah.
great thing, but it's that outcome, it's that attachment to the outcome. I think
Mm.
going into something and thinking I'm going to give it my best, and then a lot of it's out of my control, like
Yeah.
accepting that not everything is in your control. I think that can actually be maybe not a tool to get, like, necessarily really joyful, right? But you can
Mhm.
be content. So that's something I'd like to pick up on, actually, because you use quite a few different words in defining happiness, which I think is the right way to do it, because
Yeah.
I don't think it's one single thing. I think it does come on a kind of spectrum. Would you agree?
Definitely. Yeah, I agree that happiness is a spectrum. Some people might maybe innately or biologically more happy than the others. And then yeah, it also kind of it's related to the people, the environment around you, right? So yeah, the happiness definitely is a very personal thing. Each person might feel happy in different ways.
Yes, absolutely. And that kind of explains my background for those wondering. So my personal happy place is a spa. It's somewhere really tranquil, really relaxing, right? But that's not necessarily a place where I would be running around going, woo, like joy and inside out, right? That's a
Yeah,
different kind
yeah.
of thing. That is different to contentment. So I do think there's a scale. And I think when I teach this class, I always make that point. I say, running around being ecstatically happy,
Hmm.
first of all, isn't really something that can be sustained long term, because it's
Right.
just too exhausting, right? So I think when people talk about happiness in terms of how can I be happy in my life, I think what they're actually asking is how can I be content and maybe not
Exactly.
unhappy. You
Yeah.
agree?
Yeah. And again, as I already mentioned in my previous definition, I feel like happiness is some consistent feeling. It's not just, 1 second and then it's gone. And
Yeah.
for me, it's more like a pleasure, right? Like for example,
Yeah.
you've got let's say a delicious meal and then you feel the pleasure, but it's not like a sustainable, it's not like long term. But for happiness, I feel like, yeah, it's more than that. It's longer, it's everlasting.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think with pleasure, it is something that is often fleeting
Yes,
and
exactly.
perhaps more superficial as well, because I think happiness, by definition, if it's something that you cultivate, it suggests that it's a long-term thing
Hmm.
rather than a transient experience that you might
Yeah.
have after, yeah, in my case, eating a nice slice of chocolate cake or whatever it might be, that gives you pleasure, right? Which again will vary from person to person. So yeah, I think that's interesting to look at the relationship, but also the difference between happiness and pleasure. And
Yeah,
you
exactly.
mentioned earlier this idea as well that people's things that cause happiness in people will vary. And
Yeah.
I think that's true. So do you think that what causes someone happiness matters? Like if the end result is that they are happy or content
Hmm.
or whatever word you want to use, does it matter what's caused that happiness within that person?
Absolutely. I think the cause, the process all matter. Um, I'm not sure whether it's equally as the result, but definitely they matter a lot. Again, like a sometimes I might feel happy because I help someone, or sometimes I might feel happy because someone said something very nice to me. So
Yeah.
what is the reason of your happiness? I think it's really important to understand it so you can try to be more mindful about these causes, and then probably you will kind of have more happiness because you have a better understanding of the causes of your happiness. So here I have a question actually, Rosanna. What makes you happy? So you already said the spa. Is there
Yes.
anything, yeah, that makes you feel like very happy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for me, things that make me feel calm, which is again why the sparse in the background, but it's not that kind of happiness where I feel ecstatically joyful. You know, that's
Mm,
something that I think, to be honest, I rarely experience, but I'm not saying that in a kind of, lamentable way. I'm not saying it to be like, oh, woe is me, because I think
mm,
that kind of happiness is superficial and often a bit
right.
too much, let's say.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
for me, happiness, I think, comes from simplicity in my case.
Mm,
So living a kind of, like I've been asked before, what would be my dream day? And it's never anything elaborate. It's never like,
mm,
I've got to go to this amazing, wonderful place on the other side of the world.
mm.
Because I kind of often think about like the logistics of it. I'm like, could I be bothered to do all that travel? So for me, it's a really simple day, like, having a nice cup of coffee, which is again,
Mm.
perhaps more of a pleasure than, foundational happiness, but still
Yeah.
contributes. The sun makes me
Ooh,
enormously happy. Like
me
I think,
too. The weather
yeah, the
matters so
weather
much. Yeah,
has a
exactly.
huge impact on me. And relating to what you said before, actually, about like having managing your expectations. Obviously, for those that know what it's like to live in Britain, we don't always get sun. We've been very lucky. We've had a pretty good summer so far. But it's one of those things I've been really trying to work on, because I think one of the things that can help us to be happy is to know what makes us maybe unhappy and try and, I don't say avoid, because I think sometimes sadness can be valuable. And again, that's the
Yeah,
message of Inside
yeah,
Out for those that have seen that
definitely.
film. We can't run away from it because it will come back to bite us. But yeah, it's crazy how my mood can change so drastically when a bit of sun
Mm,
comes out compared to when it's raining.
hmm.
So yeah, that's my kind of personal take on it. What about you? What kinds of things make you happy?
I definitely resonate with you about the piece that's about simplicity and all of the little things that that happen in your life. Because a lot of times I feel like people are just too blind about what is happening around them. They're just too focused on their immediate job, work, without
Yeah.
noticing these little beauties in their life. So sometimes I just feel, very happy just when I'm staring at the sky, and at night. I see the stars. I'm just like lying on my bed. I feel like, well, now I feel really peaceful, really tranquil. And then that kind of gives me a moment of happiness. It's all about these little details and matters how you savor the moment in your life rather than
Yeah.
kind of being overwhelmed by all of things that is happening in your life. And then you wouldn't like even stop to reflect, right? What makes you feel happy? So I feel like, yeah,
Yes.
it's really important to be mindful about those little things that happen in your life. Maybe they're just very, very trivial, but actually when they put together, that's what kind of make life is, right? You feel like all of the little details, the people around you, yeah, you just feel this kind of tranquility in your mind, and also, yeah, like this kind of support, the help around the people. So I think that also makes me really happy.
Yeah, I really like your emphasis there on the mind and mindful, because you use those kinds of words a fair bit. And I think what I like about that is that you're not putting happiness as something that's reliant upon the external world. So even
Yeah.
though things like looking at nature, being in a sunny place, looking at the night sky, they can trigger that happiness. There's plenty of people who could be in those exact scenarios and not feel happy because they are, like you
Mm,
say, wrapped up in
yeah.
concerns about the past or worry about the future. They're worrying
Yeah.
about things that probably won't even happen, right?
Exactly.
And it
Exactly.
actually reminds me of a philosophical saying, which I never understood until it was explained in a book that I read. I thought it was just one of those like really vague, wishy-washy statements, but it's the phrase that says, wherever you go, there you are. And I thought, like, that just sounds like rubbish, right? But when I stopped to think about it, I was like,
Mm,
that makes perfect sense, because the example that kind of made it click for me is you could be on a tropical beach, loving life in theory, right? Laying down, relaxing, the most idyllic spot in the world, but you could still be completely miserable, right?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's all about your internal state, I think, a lot
Yeah.
of it anyway, right? So
Definitely.
I think that takes away the pressure of putting happiness as something external. And like you say, again, managing your expectations. So that leads me on to another question, actually, which is you mentioned this idea of people being wrapped up in their job, right? And that is often the thing that we think will bring us happiness or satisfaction or success or
Hmm.
whatever you want to
Hmm.
call it. So what's your thought on the idea that there's a connection between money and happiness? Do you think money can
Oh,
buy happiness?
oh, that's such a fantastic question. I feel like, yeah, people have talked about this question a lot of times already. For me, I think it matters is how you spend the money. It's not
Yeah.
about the amount of money you own, but how you spend it. So, like, actually, research has shown that when you're already a billionaire, like a super rich person, that doesn't really add too much happiness on top of it. Yeah, but
True.
if let's just like say you are penniless and then suddenly you got lottery, so probably that can bring you immense happiness, but still it's not everlasting, this kind of happiness,
Yes.
because what
Yeah.
matters again is how you spend the money. And
Yeah.
again, some research showed that if you spend the money to help people, to do some meaningful things instead of just wasting the money on, pleasure, on buying like branded, like very high-ended clothes, etc. Well, this kind of happiness are very ephemeral. It's very
Yes.
short term. But if
Yeah.
you use the money, for example, you're making like donations to help the people who really need the money to survive, that can actually bring you more everlasting happiness. So I think money definitely can bring you happiness, but it depends how you spend it. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think it's interesting because you're right in terms of research supporting the idea that if you get beyond a certain point in
Yeah,
terms of earning money, it doesn't really make a difference. The other thing that
yeah.
comes to mind for me, because oftentimes people just say it as if it's a completely factual thing, money can't buy happiness. And often the response that I hear to that is, well, I'd rather be crying in a Ferrari than not, right? Which is funny and it's kind of, said in a tongue-in-cheek way, but I get the point, which is that I think oftentimes people assume that okay, even if money can't buy happiness, and that's true because you can see plenty of examples of rich celebrities who are utterly miserable, right? And a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
that probably
absolutely.
to do with the fame and the pressure, but there's also the saying, "Mo money, mo problems," right? So there's that too. So I think that's true. Like money can't necessarily make you happy because there are plenty of examples of people who are not.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there is evidence to show that we delight at the unexpected. So in the scenario where you win the lottery, for instance, that will bring people that ecstasy, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's different to the foundational happiness that you were referring to earlier. So it's complicated. It's a complicated question, which is why we're talking about it. The other thing as well is that I think oftentimes people assume that people who are in what we would objectively perhaps call difficult circumstances, so let's say people who are in prison or who are homeless, right, that they're automatically going to be less happy. But because of, like
Mm,
you say, things like the genetic component behind happiness and other
right.
things as well to do with how our minds work, it's not actually true. So a little fact for everybody here, an average survey of 1.1 million people, it asked them to score their happiness out of 10. And interestingly, most people scored themselves around 7 or more out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
included people who were homeless or people who
Oh,
were in prison
wow.
for life, right? So I think that kind of goes against what we might expect, doesn't it? But it's in line with what you said earlier, which is a lot of it is internal rather than our external
Right.
circumstances.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's so important to know that happiness is something you can actually decide about yourself. It's
Yeah.
not something who give you, right? It's not external. So actually, when it comes to the Chinese culture, one thing I really dislike is that okay, once your people marry, usually the male, like the man would say, I'm gonna give you happiness. But
Oh, interesting. Is that said like in the marriage ceremony
yeah,
then?
yeah. It's kind of like that. I will make you happy, something like that. Yeah, when the two
Wow.
people marry. So I feel like, well, happiness is not what you give me, but actually it's decided by me. I can make myself
Yeah.
happy without
Yeah.
anyone around me. Yeah, so
Yes.
I really dislike this kind of concept. Okay, I'm gonna give you happiness.
Yeah, yeah, I don't blame you at all. I do as well. And I have this, I mean, this goes for other emotions besides happiness as well, because I really find it very, very concerning when people use phrases like you made me feel a certain way, because then you're putting too
Mm,
much
right.
responsibility on the shoulders of others. And
Yeah.
that's not to say that other people's actions don't affect us, right? Like the feeling is there, it's come up, but I think we really need to take ownership for our own feelings and not
Yeah.
say other people made you feel this way.
Yeah.
Like something they've done has probably triggered it, but putting
Right.
your happiness in the hands of anybody else, even if it is your significant other, I think can be really, really heading down a dangerous route and
Yeah,
can cause
totally. Yeah,
untold
agreed.
issues. So yeah, and it's interesting because this is coming from someone who, one thing I didn't mention actually earlier when you said about what things make me happy is relationships, like having good
Oh yeah.
relationships.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
it's proven to be crucial, in fact, to people's well-being. It's also something, relationships have been proven to actually extend people's lifespans, right? Stuff like that. So if we equate that with happiness, but obviously the flip side is there too, which is that if you have poor relationships with people, that can have a negative impact for obvious reasons. And another thing that we find with happy people is that they do have more friendships and better relationships, which makes sense because people want to be around people who are perhaps naturally happy. And but I agree, going back to what you said before, I think the source of that happiness does matter, right? Because I think the things that make you happy or cause feelings of happiness within you can tell you a lot about a person's character, right? So
Definitely. Yeah.
have you ever heard the concept Schadenfreude?
Not really. What is that?
Well, I'm going to play a clip from The Simpsons to to illustrate this, if you
Great.
don't mind, because I love The Simpsons first and foremost, but another thing that makes me happy. But it's interesting because it's basically taking delight in the suffering of others.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's interesting because it's one of those things where you could look at it and be like, well, that's wrong, right? Surely we shouldn't be happy about other people suffering, but it is something that some people experience. And it's interesting because evolutionary psychologists have an explanation as to why they think that is. So the clip that I'm going to play, just for a little bit of context, is Homer delighting in his next door neighbor Ned Flanders' business failing. And again, it's something that we could look at and kind of judge him for, right? The fact that he's delighting in this. And his daughter actually calls him out for it. So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, about maybe why some people experience this and where you think this might be coming from.
I'm telling you, Flanders' store was deserted. So what do you think of your bestest buddy now, Marge?
Dad, do you know what Schadenfreude is?
No, I do not know what Schadenfreude is. Please tell me, because I'm dying to know.
It's a German term for shameful joy, taking pleasure in the suffering of others.
Oh, come on, Lisa. I'm just glad to see him fall flat on his butt. He's usually all happy and comfortable and surrounded by loved ones, and it makes me feel... What's the opposite of that shameful joy thing of yours?
Sour grapes.
Boy, those Germans have a word for everything.
That's an excellent clip. Yeah. I think I already have some thoughts about your question.
Cool, go ahead.
Because like people are jealous of other people's happiness because they feel like themselves, they can't feel happy very, very easily. And then they're jealous of other people who seem to be happy all the time. And then when they have the downfall, you feel, oh, finally, this guy is miserable. So that kind of, you feel like it's a revenge for you when you see that other people are suffering. What about you? What's your understanding?
I think you've hit the nail on the head when it comes to Homer. He's definitely jealous of Flanders. And there's this idea as well of you've got to keep up with what your neighbour's doing. So if your neighbour's happy or successful, then that's something that you need to amount to as well. And I saw it actually, I was watching the TV show Outnumbered last night, which is hilarious. And I'd highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. But a very similar thing happened where the main family, basically, the wife in the family, has that perception of her neighbour. She thinks her life is perfect. And to be fair, every time this next door neighbour comes out, she's with her kids and they're all very well behaved. Meanwhile, the mum of the other family, the kids are running around being absolutely crazy. So she looks and thinks, oh, she's got this perfect life and look at her. And then she finds out that the wife is having troubles with the husband and she's like, yes, like she literally closes the door and it's like, yes, yes, yes. So happy. So I think in terms of like turning this into a practical thing, I think we need to really keep in check how we perceive others, because you made actually a really good point, which is Homer's looking at Ned thinking that he seems happy, right? But is that necessarily the case, do you think? Can we know for sure other people are happy when we're comparing ourselves to them?
Right. Yeah. I think again, other people's happiness might just be the very superficial thing that you can perceive. You don't really know what is going on in their life, right? Maybe on the surface they look like very happy, but actually they're experiencing miserable things that you can't see. So I don't think that's a good idea just to compare your happiness with other people, because again, for each person, there's a different reason that causes you happy. So there's no need to compare yourself with other people. And that would maybe only make you unhappy once you make that comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've got to be especially cautious of this if you're doing it on things like social media,
Oh,
because
yeah, exactly.
it's
Always
a
like
highlight
social
reel.
media, they show you the brighter side of their life. Hey, I'm
Yeah.
on vacation. Hey, I
Yes.
got this villa. So that would make people feel jealous, right? Why? I'm suffering. I'm like sitting in the office
Yeah.
24 hours, 7 days a week, and
Yeah.
now you're enjoying the vacation. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. We
Absolutely.
really need to be very mindful about this kind of comparison, what is presented in social media versus what is really happening in the people's life.
Good. Well, I think that's a good practical tip actually to end on for
Yeah,
people.
definitely. So
So
important.
yeah, one of many, I think. You know, I really like your takeaway about cultivating joy in the simple things in life and taking it moment by
Yeah.
moment and trying to be present and not worrying about, you know, being stuck in the past and kind of worrying about the
Yeah,
future. And I think it's
exactly.
easier said than done, but there are some sort of practical things that we could explore. But I could talk about this for ages actually. Maybe we need to do a part 2 on this. I think that would be something where we
Yeah,
could explore the practical side of it a little bit more. But
definitely.
yeah, no, it's been really good. Thank you so much again, Jan,
Thank
for
you, Rosanna.
joining.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, we'll talk about another topic very soon. Maybe a part 2 to this, maybe something completely different. But in the meantime, again, thank you so much. And yeah,
thank you
hopefully see
very
you
much,
soon.
Rosanna. Bye.
Take care, Jan.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.